Welcome to this explainer. Look, if you're an executive or a corporate leader steering a company that manufactures, imports, or honestly even just relies on plastic packaging, you are currently standing at a pretty critical juncture. The landscape of India's waste management has just experienced a seismic shift with the 2025 and 2026 amendments to the plastic waste management rules. And I want to be clear, this isn't just a minor regulatory update. We're talking about a fundamental, structural change in exactly how extended producer responsibility, or EPR, is enforced. So today, we're going to break down these new realities, we'll examine the financial risks, and we'll outline exactly how your company needs to pivot its operations so you can stay compliant and competitive.
Okay, let's dive right into this, because a potential 1 crore rupee penalty is exactly why this cannot be ignored. That is the maximum environmental compensation penalty your company could be staring down for major violations under these new amendments. The Central Pollution Control Board, the CCPB, well, they aren't treating compliance as a mere suggestion anymore. The financial stakes have quite literally never been higher, and the cost of brushing these changes off, it could be absolutely devastating to your bottom line.
So to get your operations aligned, here is our roadmap. Number 1, the executive wake-up call. 2, 2016 versus new EPR mandates. 3, navigating material recovery targets. 4, surviving digital audit trails. 5, redesigning your EPR strategy. And 6, future-proofing corporate operations.
Let's kick things off with Section 1, the executive wake-up call, financial and operational risks. So, the CPCB has completely overhauled its enforcement mechanism. If you miss your deadlines or say you fail to report accurately, boom, the base penalty immediately hits you at 1 lakh rupees. And that's accompanied by an ongoing delay fee of 5,000 rupees for every single day you remain non-compliant. As we just mentioned, major violations can trigger that massive environmental compensation, running up to 1 crore rupee. But the risks aren't just financial. Non-compliance can literally cripple your day-to-day business. You're looking at potential operational shutdowns and a 1 to 5 year blacklisting from government tenders. Plus your ESG ratings, they're going to plummet, which will directly scare away investors and strategic partners who are increasingly prioritizing verifiable sustainability. Actually, in extreme cases of willful evasion, there's even a provision for imprisonment of up to 5 years under the Environment Protection Act. Like I said, the authorities are not playing around here.
Moving right along to Section 2, 2016 versus new EPR mandates, the paradigm shift.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is seeing the fundamental shift in regulatory philosophy. It is stark. Under the old 2016 framework, which introduced the original EPR concepts, the focus was simply on collection. The whole goal was just to retrieve the waste you generated. But shockingly, the reality on the ground was that companies were only achieving a 50 to 60% actual collection efficiency. That left nearly half of the plastic sitting in informal dump sites or out in the environment. So the 2025/2026 amendments represent a strategic pivot. It's no longer just about managing waste, it's about forcing a true circular economy. The updated definitions of end-of-life disposal now heavily prioritize circularity over just incineration or dumping it in a landfill. The government is essentially mandating that waste be used as a resource in new products. That means strict, hard requirements for recycled content percentages in your new packaging alongside mandatory reuse quotas. It's a massive leap from simply retrieving packaging to completely redesigning what it's made of in the first place.
Which brings us to Section 3, navigating material recovery targets, the complexity.
Before we get into the exact percentages, you really need to know how the government is categorizing your materials. It breaks down into 3 buckets. Category 1 is rigid packaging. Think PET water bottles and hard containers. This is generally the easiest stuff to recycle. Category 2 is flexible packaging, so your single-layer grocery bags and films. And then there's Category 3, which is multi-layered packaging. Think of those shiny chips packets or small juice cartons. This is notoriously the hardest material to recycle because it's this complex web of mixed materials. It requires highly advanced technical processes to actually prove physical co-processing or chemical recycling. Basically, your regulatory burden is directly tied to how heavily you rely on these specific 3 categories.
So, the crucial point to take away from this is that this isn't some flat rule you hit once and forget about. It's an aggressively escalating year-over-year obligation. Let's look at the numbers. If you're using Category 1 rigid packaging, starting right now in 2025-26, 30% of that packaging must be recycled material. And by 2028-29, that target doubles to 60%. Even that incredibly difficult Category 3 multi-layered plastic has a 5% recycled content mandate starting now, which then doubles to 10% by 2027-28. What this means on the ground is that your procurement teams need to start securing high-quality recycled material immediately. The demand across the entire industry is going to skyrocket as these target percentages climb higher every single year.
Now, to offer just a bit of reassurance, the government has built in what critics are calling elastic rules to give you some industrial flexibility. If your company happens to fail to meet its recycling target in a given year, you aren't immediately punished. You're actually allowed a 3-year buffer to carry forward that shortfall, provided you can demonstrate partial compliance annually. Plus, there are some really vital exemptions. If your packaging is used for food contact materials, where current safety laws actually prohibit the use of recycled plastic due to contamination risks, you can apply for technical and statutory exemptions. But keep in mind, these exemptions are granted strictly on a case-by-case basis by the CPCB, and you need sufficient proof. They are absolutely not automatic.
All right, let's look at Section 4, Surviving Digital Audit Trails, Decoding the Portal.
Let's move to the new administrative reality and see how this builds a completely transparent system. The era of manual reporting and kind of vague compliance, that's entirely over. Every producer, importer, and brand owner must register on the centralized CPCB online portal. Once you're in there, you have to record the exact weights of virgin, recycled, and reused plastic you're utilizing. The real-time updates now link your EPR certificates directly to your specific waste generator IDs. On top of that, the system tracks the buying and selling of your EPR certificates. This portal essentially gives regulators real-time data access, which facilitates a much higher frequency of mandatory third-party environmental audits. They can see exactly what you are producing, what you're recovering, and crucially, where your compliance gaps are, instantly.
So, how do we actually adapt to all this? Let's move to Section 5, Redesigning Your EPR Strategy.
The reality is, you cannot do this alone. Your relationship with waste management agencies has to change right now. Partnering with CCPB authorized recyclers is completely non-negotiable. Why? Because only authorized recyclers can generate valid EPR certificates. These facilities have to maintain incredibly strict documentation proving the physical co-processing, chemical recycling, and overall recovery of these plastics. When they process waste, they issue certificates that can range from tiny fractions of a kilogram all the way up to 1,000 kilograms. And here's a massive detail. The recycled content in imported packaging does not count toward your obligations. You must effectively buy these recycled plastic credits from within India's compliance system to legally prove your material recovery.
There is a stark difference between corporate survival and corporate failure under these new rules. If you take a reactive compliance approach, waiting until the end of the financial year to just buy whatever EPR certificates are left on the portal, you are opening yourself up to massive risks. Everyone is going to be scrambling for credits at the same time, leading to severe shortages and absolute price gouging. That could easily leave you facing those massive CPCB fines we talked about earlier. Instead, you need a proactive partnership model. You've got to renegotiate contracts with waste management agencies right now to lock in your material sourcing. Treat your EPR not as a tax, but as a strategic asset. If you earn credits by exceeding your targets, it allows you to sell those certificates on the open market. You can literally turn an environmental liability into a highly valuable, sustainable corporate accreditation asset.
Let's wrap things up with Section 6, Future-Proofing Corporate Operations.
All right, here's the rapid-fire checklist you need to hand over to your operations and compliance teams today to maintain market access and avoid regulatory friction. First up, integrate eco-design early. Consultants highly recommend moving away from that Category 3 multi-layered plastic wherever possible, just to simplify your recovery process. Second, set up robust internal tracking immediately. You absolutely have to segregate your virgin materials from your recycled materials on the books. Third, prepare your supply chains right now for mandatory recycled content sourcing. The demand for high-quality recycled PET and flexible films is going to surge. Fourth, plan ahead for the financial market of EPR certificate trading. Budget for the inevitable market fluctuations. And finally, if you're a food or beverage brand relying on safety loopholes, make sure all your statutory and technical exemption requests are formally and proactively submitted to the CCPB, and make sure they have full scientific backing. At the end of the day, the move toward 100% circularity is inevitable. The 2025 and 2026 mandates, they're really just the beginning of a much tighter global and national regulatory net. So as a corporate leader, you have to ask yourself this critical question. Is your packaging strategy an impending financial liability, or is it a future-proof asset? The answer to that question depends entirely on the proactive operational changes your team takes from this moment forward. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Now it's time to get to work.